Well, for those that asked last week, they do have a box of extras of these down in the information booth, I noticed. So if anybody really gets inspired and wants to read the whole book, there are copies down there. But maybe I can save you a few dollars and give you the gist of it. But anyway, this is a book entitled Missional Renaissance, the big title, and then the small title, after a colon, if you see it printed somewhere else, Changing the Scorecard for the Church. And that scorecard has to do with how we evaluate ourselves, our success or failures. Performance review is a scorecard. And sometimes if you've ever experienced one of those, you find out that you've been taken off for something that you didn't know was a part of the assignment. And it's very frustrating. There's the front. Yeah, Reggie McNeil is the author, and he's been a part of an organization that tries to help the church be more effective in its mission and ministry. But I'm not going to follow the exact little outline that was given for us to be using in this teaching, because it calls for brief comments and then I throw it out to you to discuss. And seeing how you don't like to do that much, I'm going to go a different route. But I was thinking, as I was reading through it, how can I present the ideas? And the first one was a big question that might be on your minds, and that is, why did this guy write this book in the first place? What motivated him to spend all that time and energy to write a book? And then, after he got it written and published, why are we being asked to listen to his ideas? What's the big deal? Well, the first reason, and he goes in a lot of detail trying to outline it, and that is that our world, our social, political, economic, cultural world has dramatically been changing all around us. Young people and businesses are operating on a sophisticated technological network of communications. And because of all those dramatic changes, the church and our message about God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit, love and forgiveness, discipleship and following the teachings and example of Jesus are being lost or being drowned out by all the other stuff that's out in the culture and being ignored by so much of what is happening. There are so many things we try to do and communicate to the rest of the world that are being ignored because we haven't translated our message into a medium or language or integrated it into today's language and modern modes of communication. Now, how is that happening? And I thought of, since the football season is just beginning, an analogy for what McNeil thinks has happened and why it is so critical that we figure out a better way to go about being the church. Football season has just started. Anybody watch any games? Okay. Well, if we use the analogy of football, our situation today is something like the church deciding to field a football team to compete in the NCAA at the level of OU, OSU, and TU. So we're going to take volunteers. All you come out, and we're going to start practicing out here on our field out here. And since we are so steep in our tradition and feel like it is so good and valuable, we're going to use old things. You know those helmets that were just kind of like a leather cap, and you put a little stuffing of cotton in your jersey, and we're going to use that old ball that was not shaped that'll be easy for passing. It's better for drop kicking. Did you know you used to kick field goals? You'd drop the ball, and then boom, you'd hit it as it just hit the ground, and then you kick the field goal. These pointy balls now don't work that well, but that more rounded one worked a little better that way. So we're going to go out and field a team using the old methods. Will we be successful? I think we'd have trouble making one first down, much less scoring any points, if we went about it using the old methods. McNeil points out that and describes that our antiquated and out-of-touch methods and ways need a renewal. We need a renaissance, a new idea, a new way of dealing with the world and confronting the world with what we think is important message. David, as well as our bishop and the conference leadership, believe that McNeil is correct in a lot of his analysis, and that many of his suggestions would be effective in revitalizing the church and our God-given mission. So McNeil calls it a missional renaissance because his idea is different from and much bigger than simply just another program. It's not a program that you call all of the evangelism committee and evangelism ministers and just get them to go to a little meeting and training event, and we have this new program. Here's a little booklet. Go home, follow the little booklet, and do an evangelism program. Basically, it's a radical change of mind and a view of reality and purpose. In its most fundamental change, it's from thinking and planning and programming focused on trying to attract and pull people out of the world into the church, and then measuring our successes, the scorecard idea, measuring our successes by how many people are spending how many hours inside the church building, attending worship and Sunday school, prayer meetings and Bible study. He's saying we need to turn that around to focusing on deploying disciples and sending people out into the world, out into the community to connect and touch people's lives. In our denominational mission statement, you've probably heard it many times, in order to get us to be more focused and directed as a church. Our whole purpose is the making of disciples for the transformation of the world. Have you all heard that? Making of disciples for the transformation of the world. Well, that's good, and it's properly stated, but we've been stuck in the first part, trying to make disciples, attracting, educating, training, and building up. We've tried to transform the world by trying to attract and draw a critical mass of the population into the church, equating discipleship with joining the church and attending Sunday school and worship. And we've kind of assumed that if we can do that, then somehow that second part will automatically take care of itself, that transforming the world. Once we reach that critical mass of Christians in church on Sundays, then somehow that's going to transform the world. And we don't think much about, well, now how's that going to happen, and what are those changes going to be like? We've got so focused on the first part. Now, frankly, neither side is working very well. The percentage of the population willing to say that they are church members and committed to the church has dropped. There's lots of people who believe or have faith, but it's not in traditional Christian terms. We have that expression you've probably heard, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. Now, and that spiritual takes all kinds of different forms. And a big part of that spiritual is very strongly just very self-centered and isolated, individualistic. It's not being a part of getting out, doing something to transform the world. It's just keeping myself peaceful, happy, and which is not a bad thing, but it's not transforming the world. And we find that we feel like, it may not be true, because some people have done some statistics, it seems like the world is more violent and more dangerous. There seems to be more, with all the terrorism that goes on around the world and the battles that never seem to stop, it doesn't seem like we're gaining much ground on bringing the kingdom of God into the world and the peaceful kingdom. But we haven't given up on the truth and goodness of the gospel, but we need to realize that some of our methods might be counterproductive. Where did it go? One of the things that we have learned over the last year, as we've asked for consultants and people to help us out with understanding the culture and how people react. You remember our bulletin used to have the ink drawing of the church. And what the consultants told us is, in today's culture, well, all of us know what that is, and we love the church, and we appreciate, the ink drawing that shows us. But a complete stranger to Christianity and to church and all would look at that ink drawing and the old English print and so forth, would think, that looks old. That looks historic, something to be on a shelf gathering dust, not something exciting and interesting for me. And so they talked to us about how do we maintain our sense of the history and tradition, but have a look that doesn't give that old, dusty, worn-out image that's nothing new and exciting and interesting. So we've got a different cover that gives a different impression. It's got a different feel to it. So on all kinds of things of what we're needing to do, they say, is to get a whole different vision and outlook and perspective. But we haven't given up. We don't want to throw away our faith and our beliefs and the Bible, but we need to make some shifts. And an example of the shift that could be made is, well, let me back up here. What McNeil is saying is that our focus has been on growing the church, and church growth is not bad, but church growth is not the end or the goal of our calling as Christians. We've made it such, but clergy and lay, for all of us, the goal, our calling, is to make ourselves God's instruments in growing the kingdom of God in the world. We've thought in the past we could do it by growing the church, but that hasn't worked very well. But how does that growing the kingdom in the world happen? And he doesn't have a clear plan. He has all kinds of little example stories. and one of which is this one. In order to make that shift, there was for decades we've been doing Vacation Bible School. Summer comes, kids are out of school, we'll do Vacation Bible School for a week at church, and we'll use the church building, we'll bring all the kids here, we'll try to tell people, invite your friends and neighbors to come to Bible school. And in the summertime and in some churches, there are people doing babysitting in their homes during the summer for kids, and they think, wow, here's a week where I can take all the kids to this church for Bible school, and it's a free entertainment, and I can take a rest from trying to entertain and give these kids snacks and all of that. The church will do it for me. And so we get a lot of extra kids, and we think, well, that's going to work, but it doesn't work too well for attracting folks to come back because those kids' parents aren't involved in this. It's just the babysitter. And anyway, but we try that kind of openness and welcoming, but it is church-centered. Now, one creative woman in a small town, in a small area where church was full of lots of older folks, and they didn't have really any kids in the church. But she felt like, well, if we're not going to have Bible school here, Bible school is an important learning experience for kids and reaching kids and sowing the seeds of faith with kids. So she decided to take it on as a mission, and there was a daycare center close to her church, and she asked them, can we bring Bible school, Vacation Bible School, to your facility? And they were happy to do that, and so they did. And in that process, they reached a lot of kids they would never have reached the old way. And what grew out of that was a relationship with the daycare center, because there were a lot of other needs that they recognized with the clients and so forth. And after they did that and built the relationship, they did get a few families found their way to that church. A similar system or situation this last 2 summers ago, Bobby was going to be in a Duke camp over at Duke University, so I decided to drive him over and go visit my 2 sisters that live over in that part of the country. And one sister lives in a community right outside Asheville, North Carolina. And when I was there, she and her husband are very active in their church and in the district, and she was very involved in getting started and getting things set up, providing summer hot lunches for low-income kids. That once school is out, if they're really at nutritional risk, I forget what that, it's something risk, it's not hunger risk. Anyway, there's a lot of families where kids can't count on 3 meals a day. The family just doesn't have the resources. And if they didn't have the school lunch program, these kids would fall into some serious malnutrition. So when it stops in the summer, if these kids are still going to get some healthy nutrition, there needs to be a lunch program continued. So a combination of the United Methodist district churches and the school were trying to organize this and have it happen. But as it was working out, my sister was involved in leadership on that, and they found out that a lot of the families that were in this group of low income were Hispanics. And because some of them and their family might have been undocumented, that ran into the fact that the North Carolina legislature and all had gotten real hard-nosed about illegal immigrants and were cracking down, so that parents of the Hispanic families were real close, and they watched over their kids very closely. They didn't just let them run loose. They didn't wouldn't let their kids go by themselves up to the school to get the lunch. They felt they needed to take them. But they were afraid to take them because they were afraid of being harassed, even if they were legal immigrants with green cards or whatever, or they had a relative who wasn't and didn't want to have those people recognize, well, here's a Hispanic family, let's go watch them. And so they didn't take the kids. So they thought, now how can we do this? And a part of the problem was the kids where they lived was in a lot of them in these trailer parks. And in North Carolina, the trailer parks are really neat. They're not like our trailer parks where there's a place and they cram them all together and they have asphalt and no trees and no park and they're, get kind of trashy looking. In North Carolina, it's hilly and lots of trees, and so the trailers are scattered in among the trees, and it's really a very pleasant environment. But anyway, they had to go and cross a busy street was another aspect of why they didn't want them to do that, to get to where the school was. So my sister tried to figure out where can they set up the feeding station, and so she went to the trailer parks. And they found a woman there who didn't have a car, but her driveway was available within the trailer park, and it was hers. She could say, yes, you're welcome to set up here. And so they did. And we went with my sister, and she was getting everything arranged, dropping off the tent and the stuff that needed to be set up every day. But then she said, wait here. And she went through the trailer park and would find where, and these were kind of nice, and they had built, they were permanent trailers. They weren't moving them in, moving them out, but they had built these sizable porches onto them. And on the porches were kids at several of these where the parents say, stay on the porch, you're not going to run loose. And she would see kids, so she would go up and tell them about this feeding site that was going to be available. Well, she took 45 minutes. I'm sitting here waiting. Where did she go? Where is she? And when she came back, she said, well, I've got to report. We need to increase the number of meals to bring to this location by 40. She found 40 more than they realized were in there, and they invited them. But besides that, she had found that there's a way that you can order children's books that are where when they print, they always print more than they need. And so for these overruns of children's books, if you know who to connect and you can get them like 10 cents on the dollar of the overrun, and they would sell them to nonprofits like churches and schools and so forth. And so she ordered a bunch and then was handing out the books at the feeding site so these children would have something to read. And also making some connections with, like we're doing at Burroughs, reading buddies to help kids work on their reading in the summer. So all of this is coming together where the needs are. And then I had the thought, and I don't know if they did it, but I said, oh my gosh, the church should go into the trailer park and have a vacation Bible school, just like we do on our mission trips to Mexico and Alaska and different places. Not only take a building team and a medical team, but take a vacation Bible school team to that place. And so, anyway, that is the idea or the shift in perspective that McNeil is saying the church needs to be about. Because in so many of these places, if you just send out little flyers and invite people to come to the church, you might get a few, but you're not going to touch the folks who may need the love of God and the message the most. Let's see. So locally here, we have two ministries. One on the same Vacation Bible School, we did that up in Spavinaw. Remember when we were advertising that the Spavinaw church didn't have enough children, and so they were going to do a community-wide thing and try to reach the children. So that became a mission trip to get out there. And then locally within our church, we have two ministries that are already operating in this way, following this shift even before we read the book. And one is our compassion meals. The old way of model would be to try to get folks who are in really tough need to start coming to church and try to learn the Bible and try to get regular in their religious walk and spirituality. And we know that just doesn't work well because these folks have got so many troubles and problems. That's not going to happen. But instead, we recognize that there are hungry people who are in need of so many things, so we invite them to this meal, this compassion dinner, but we also invite the social service agency workers so that as these folks come to the meal, then they can connect with the social service workers, because these folks were not finding their way to the agencies, but we helped make the connections and helped that happen. And then have a little worship service, a short worship service there. But it's a way of, we're using our facility, but we're not trying to do it in the old way of telling folks to get all cleaned up and come to worship and be like us. We accept their situation and condition and deal with the needs first. And in this way, it's offering a hand up rather than merely the hand out, which doesn't seem to really make changes. It meets an immediate need. The second that's real exciting is our Sistema Tulsa, the children's orchestra program that'll be beginning this week, this Wednesday. And it is actually a mission and a ministry into the community to address the needs of the disadvantaged children in the under and low-performing schools. Where similar programs have been established, the grades go up, the discipline problems go down. It helps in social development for the kids and life skill development and success rates of staying in school for greater hopes and strides toward success in life are greatly enhanced by this program. Now, the old model of church would be if we wanted to reach folks in those neighborhoods where the underperforming schools are, we would have to organize, can I have volunteers to go with pamphlets door to door in that neighborhood and knock on the doors and invite the people to come. Well, frankly, we can't get volunteers to do that in the rich neighborhoods down south. It's not what we're comfortable doing, is it? No. So, the mission renaissance approach is to see a need and design an effective plan to address the need, and then deploy and send and recruit the missionaries, the disciples, to do the work of touching lives and making a difference and bringing about God's will for the healing of a broken world in those places where the change can happen. Our Tulsa Sistema is not, and I emphasize, is not an evangelism gimmick. We're not doing this in order to try to then hook and make these children and their families feel obligated to come and be a part of our church. The music is the tool to teach the skills for success. And just as we've been helping at Burroughs in order to help the children in need there, but if our love of God and love of people and the self-giving, self-sacrificing love inspires some to want to come get to know us and why we're doing this, then that's a byproduct. But again, this program is not a gimmick. It's not a bait and switch kind of thing where we're trying to grow the church. We're really trying to be the church in mission, transforming the world and the community in effective ways by getting at some of the root causes of the big problems in order to help the children at an early age stay in school and be successful in life. Now, the 3 points that McNeil says we need to be making shifts are, number 1 is from an internal to an external focus. It's a matter of focus and goal setting for the results and the impact in the world and in the community for the transformation of the world, or building the kingdom of God on earth, as we have said for a long time. And it's not an either or, but a both and. But it has this external focus to remind ourselves that we are not the end or the goal in ourselves, to glorify ourselves. Jesus, we remember, used a metaphor of the leaven in the bread or yeast to make the bread rise, that we as Christians and disciples need to be the leaven in society, that our influence out in the society will help things rise to a higher level, just as the yeast or the leaven in the bread helps it rise to become what it's supposed to be. But without the yeast, then it's just a lump, and it's a brick, and it's hard to eat. But with the leaven, then it becomes what it's meant to be. And so we need to be the leaven in society to help the health and wholeness and goodness to be there. Now, in the past, some people had the image that the world is a corrupt and tainted place and that we should separate ourselves and be uninvolved in worldly things and concentrate only on the spiritual matters. The extreme cases were the Mennonites and the Hutterite communities. You've seen them with their little carriages and horse-drawn carriages and wearing old clothes, old by our standards, the long dresses and so forth. And Jehovah's Witnesses lean that way, and some conservative churches that used to forbid going to the movies and dances and card playing and forbade TV watching. If it's anything to have to do with the world, we have to stay away from it, separate ourselves from it. And a part of that style would be to have programming at the church every night of the week so that you would be in Bible study or prayer meeting or some other project at the church for the church so that you wouldn't be tempted to go to the bar and get drunk and get in trouble. Anybody grow up in that kind of a church? I heard an interview with on NPR with somebody who had made horror movies, but he had grown up in that kind of a home and had never been to a movie until he got to be an adult. And anyway, he was saying in that repressive environment, he was taught to, all he had to do was read but his imagination, once he grew up and left that environment, his imagination went kind of wild. But anyway, but he didn't turn into a bad person. He just became a very rich person and successful because he was able to create horror movies with a new genre. But anyway, but there was a little bit of philosophical aspect of letting the movie show us things about ourselves, so he wasn't all perverse. But anyway, on the other hand, more progressive churches didn't think in those extremes, but along the same lines, we in the progressive mode of Christianity were trying to create a community of faith wherein love and forgiveness and caring and compassion would operate in our midst and set an example and be a model for the world. And it sort of had an unspoken and sometimes spoken, see how we love each other. You know, you see we're a friendly church, so leave that unfriendly world out there and come be with us. Well, in both the conservative mode and the progressive mode, an unintended dynamic often occurred. If those people we sought to reach and connect with weren't fully recovered from their alcoholism or their gambling addictions or had failed marriages, in the more conservative tradition, they weren't pure enough to belong. You stay outside until you clean yourself up, and then you can come be a part of us. Or some of those bad habits and immaturity in the faith and understanding, when folks would come into our loving, happy environment, their problems and their behavior sometimes caused conflicts and upsets. They made waves in the calm waters that we wanted to have here with this peaceful love and caring for each other. They made it hard to love them because they still had problems and needed help. And so the unintended consequences were somewhat the same. You need to behave better and be more like us. Get yourself like us first, and then you'll really be welcome and included. So then another version of that would be the church tried to create an oasis in a troubled world, but we weren't comfortable letting the people with those troubles into our oasis because it made it hard to maintain that peaceful calm. We'll send money or we'll toss food baskets over our wall, but we'd rather focus on ourselves and our needs, keeping ourselves comfortable and happy. Well, McNeil suggests that we don't really grow and develop in our faith until we get outside of ourselves and get outside of our comfort zones. So this missional shift one from the internal to the external ministry focus is one of the big ones that he's suggesting. The second suggestion of the shift is to recognize that so many people in the culture and even ourselves really want personal growth. And in our compassion dinners and in the Systema Tulsa, that's what we're trying to enable, personal growth, as an objective for the recipients of the mission, but even more so for ourselves as members who are involved in these missions to experience growth and development for ourselves. This is not a busy work project like stuffing envelopes or painting stripes on the parking lot or raking leaves. These are times of personal interaction, touching lives, building relationships, where when we do build relationships, we change and hopefully can grow. Now, the third one, the search for personal growth, that he says is the big shift in missional focus, is from program development to people development. That there are, so often we focus on having programs and having the criteria of measuring, well, how many programs did we have and how many people came to the programs, but we don't go that next step and ask, when the people came, were they helped? We ask, did you have fun? Did you enjoy it? But were you really helped? And if so, how? And what kinds of growth and development for your spiritual life, your emotional life, your relationships do you really need and want? And how can we help? And then find out, how can we measure that to know if we're really doing any good? One of the things, how many of you have taken Disciple Bible courses? Okay. Did you stop at Disciple 1, Disciple 2, and 3, 4, Jesus and the Disciple? Well, anyway, one of the things that, it's called Disciple Bible Study, right? The intent when they started that with Disciple 1 was to lead folks through Disciple Bible Study. You remember when you're getting toward the end of Disciple 1, you're supposed to be thinking and praying about, how are you called to be a disciple? Remember? That was in Disciple 1? No? You've forgotten? Oh, you didn't take it. Okay. Well, that was the intent of the program. But one of the unintended consequences was it was such a great experience in the small group. That bonding and friendship and that growing and learning and stretching the mind and understanding the Bible was so wonderful an experience that when you got to the end, instead of that original intent that you were inspired to go forth and spend that time as a disciple doing something that you felt called to do for God and the kingdom and others, I want to sign up for another one. That was so good. I want to do that again. And so we developed Disciple 2, and then 3, and then 4. Now, that was not a bad thing, but it was in that mode of focusing on ourselves and the church and building programs, and something didn't quite work on getting outside of the church into the world with that enthusiasm for touching people's lives, making a difference, doing something good. Now, in the process, probably in the smaller circle of our relationships, we built really good, strong bonds and had lifelong connections, and probably helped us be a better person at home in the family and a nicer person at work. But the design of the program was to find some really deep, strong involvement to be in service. And one of them was, and some of you may have done this, was to be inspired to be a disciple teacher and pull a group together and then, have it grow exponentially that way. Did any of you become disciple teachers? No? Okay. Well, McNeil was saying there, and he isn't condemning the church, there are so many good things that are happening, but we're missing a lot of other things getting out into the community and out into the world. Now, that's just the beginning, and he's got a whole bunch of other things, but let me stop and we'll try a little bit of what the plan was. How does that strike you? Any thoughts? Well, what you've heard so far, does that sound like, wow, that's a good thing, I think he's on the right track, or oh my gosh, I'm not so sure about that, or Is he nuts? For the world. Yeah, and that's the awkwardness of it. He doesn't have a laid out plan that this is what everybody has to do. So much of it depends on where you are, what's in your neighborhood around you, and who are your people. He does use one analogy that I think is helpful. So often, he said, have you ever been on a trip and you've had to fly, and you get to the airport, okay, and at the airport they have all of these chairs and they have these little places where you can get things to eat and magazine racks and all of that. And the airport tries to make it comfortable for you. It's different from the airlines, but but it's as if the church wants to be an airport to make get everybody in the airport and get as many people as we can get in the airport and fill all the chairs in the airport, when the reason you're at the airport is you've got some other destination. And that's his point in this. You need the airport in order to find your plane to get to that final destination, to where you're going to live your life and be of service to God and others. And that's the idea. He's saying we have kind of gotten the idea that we're supposed to keep everybody in the airport, keep everybody in the church, and forget that our main purpose is you get them to the airport and you help them make the connections to get to the final destination. But we've gotten so focused on making them comfortable and giving you something to eat, and here's a pillow and a blanket, but anyway, and we're praying for a snowstorm so he can keep you here longer. But anyway, any other thoughts, reflections? Yeah, we've right, Sistema.
Like in his ministry, he's really trying to outsource this more, involved externally.
Right. Yeah, that's a focus, and that David has had, and it's been part of his ministry all along. But one of the weaknesses that I see as I read this is that he's so intent on the getting people out there that a lot of his ideas of getting folks out there is getting folks out there too soon. And, too soon to have the spiritual growth and maturity in order to deal with as heavy a burden as someone might encounter when they really go out someplace. It's sort of like sending someone out to sell something, and you haven't really taught them the language of encountering folks for trying to sell, and a lot of us will approach that. You don't really want to buy this book, do you? I didn't think so. I'll go. You don't want to buy it either, do you? Yeah, you don't. No, you. Instead of, this is the greatest book I've ever found. No. I'm doing a sales. I'm doing the sales pitch of how to go out and do a job. Now, sometimes folks have good intentions, but mess things up. And if we haven't helped people fully understand, the best way to do something, then we shouldn't just send them out helter-skelter start trying to do things to change. One of the things that they have, an example was a missionary group at one time went to a community, and they had a real good deal on getting a whole lot of little hatchets, and they took them to give out as gifts, and they were giving them to children and little boys and little girls. But they hadn't been in the culture long enough to know that the transition from boyhood to manhood was for that young man to be able to get a hatchet. And so when they go in handing out hatchets to just anybody of any age, any gender, it just played havoc on their culture. And instead of going and doing good, this untrained person, or one of the things they say, if you really want to do a mission right in the foreign missions, you need to go and spend at least a year and do nothing but learn who these people are. What do they believe? How do their relationships work? Is it a matriarchy? Is it a patriarchy? Is it a money economy? Or is it a trading goods and services economy? How does it work? And if I want to bring the gospel of God's truth into that community, I've got to find the connecting points where this word is a blessing and doesn't create a major crack and disruption because I didn't interpret it correctly to fit their need. And sometimes we can think we're going to help somebody, and we go in and we don't like what they're doing or how they're doing it, and we're very judgmental, and we're going to go fix them, when often it's us that needs the fixing. We need the sensitivity and awareness that what we think is the problem and so offensive works fine for them. The real need is over here, and we were blind to it. So those are what I mean. If we just send people out too fast to get involved, but basically the idea is to think, and the thing we've learned and said so many times is our faith is not supposed to be active here at church and then turned off when we go out into the world. We're supposed to integrate our life and our faith in ways that make an impact in the world. And so he's encouraging us to think more about that and to be more intentional about that. And anyway, we'll discuss this some more. So think about it and bring your questions. And if you really want to know exactly what he says, they do have some extra copies down in the information booth. Let us pray. Well, dear God, we do want to be your servants and your witness in the world, not so much with our mouths, but with our actions of compassion and mercy, that your love and grace have touched our lives and work through our lives. In Christ's name, amen.